He wasn't a pilot. He was a merchant of death, and he had just obliterated the Navy's most terrifying simulation with a suicidal gambit. In the freezing, unforgiving ink of the void, where elite highborn pilots chase nothing but accolades, kill marks, and cheap glory, a common-born boy from the dead-end outer settlements did the unthinkable. Wyatt Staples completely shattered the Navy's most impossible meat-grinder trial, right before the eyes of the fleet's highest rulers. The terraced gallery held its collective breath, the heavy silence thick enough to choke on. Princes and princesses rose from their plush velvet seats in sheer, unvarnished disbelief. Overhead, the holographic leaderboard flashed a single name at the absolute top, a name that, by every sacred law of bloodline and structural military doctrine, had absolutely no right to be there. But this story isn't just about a stunning, unexpected victory. It is about the horrifying, systematic price this ordinary pilot must pay for stepping out of his place. The pristine pride of the nobility has been dragged through the grease and dirt of the lower decks, and the system cannot let that insult stand. Now the heavy steel doors are closing in on Wyatt Staples. Behind locked bulkheads, away from prying eyes, they are breaking him, dismantling the man piece by piece to reshape him into a mindless, obedient weapon that knows its master. Can a commoner survive the crushing, agonizing weight of this ruthless cosmic hierarchy? Or will this war of gods reduce his defiance to stardust? The sheer, staggering impossibility of that victory left the simulator gallery in a state of absolute, dead silence. Across the sweeping, terrace seating, off-duty commoners, grease-stained deck crews, and weary support staff hung precariously over the iron railings, as if they had just witnessed a miracle or an execution. Nobody dared to utter a word. Kael stood just inside the threshold, his fists white-knuckled and trembling against the cold iron railing. Beside him, deck boss Myra Cade, a woman barely 5 feet tall who usually commanded the hangar deck like a seasoned warlord, had turned completely to stone, her arms frozen across her chest. Below them, glowing with a fierce, aggressive light on the giant holographic display, suspended above the 20 neural training pods. A single line of text burned into the minds of everyone present like white-hot coal. "He actually did it," Myra whispered, her voice a fragile, fractured mix of awe and deep, underlying terror. "He didn't just pass the test, Mara," Kael replied, his voice strained, his chest tightening as his eyes locked onto Wyatt Staples' collapsed, limp body being pulled from the neural pod by a frantic medical team. He stripped the nobility of their armor. He proved that their pristine rules, their generations of genetic enhancements, and their sacred doctrine are nothing but paper boats against a commoner's raw, ugly survival instinct. Down on the flight floor, the noble pilots looked physically sick, their faces pale with a toxic mixture of shock and rage. Sub-Lieutenant Grint Montmer, a raven-haired aristocrat whose gene-enhanced green eyes always weaponized a commoner's flaws, was practically shaking with fury, his immaculate uniform suddenly feeling like a cage. Beside him, 20-year-old Ensign Mern Paskin, a pilot from an insignificant house who starved for accolades to raise his family's status, stared at the leaderboard as if his entire future, his very purpose for living, had been erased in a single second by a man who hauled waste for a living. Then from the high, heavily guarded royal booth, Princess Clara's bright, delighted laughter echoed through the cavernous silence. She was captivated, utterly amused by the sheer audacity of the reckless, suicidal run. But beside her, the Prince and Lady Cynthia Winfield looked severe, their expressions carved from blocks of unforgiving ice. Commander Redford Callan, the legendary Vorpal Strike himself, looked down at Staples' unconscious form, his eyes narrowed into a lethal mask. This victory wasn't a cause for celebration. It was a structural glitch, a dangerous anomaly that threatened the very foundation of the fleet. As the medical team wheeled Staples out on a stretcher, his head lolling uselessly to the side, the heavy, suffocating murmur of the room finally returned. But it wasn't a cheer. It was a defensive, toxic whisper, the sound of an elite class scrambling to rationalize how a lesser being had just outflown them all. Kael turned his eyes away from the floor to look at his best friend and new squadron's finest pilot, Warrant Officer Jace Rook. Jace stood rigidly by his own pod, his helmet tucked perfectly under his arm, his posture a flawless, unyielding wall of military discipline. He had placed fourth, a phenomenal, respectable achievement that would have made headlines on any other day. But Staples' spectacular, mad run had completely eclipsed Jace's years of steady excellence, reducing his hard work to background noise in a single heartbeat. Jace didn't look at the leaderboard. He didn't look at the royals. He turned on his heel and walked directly toward the exit, his face an unreadable mask. Kael slipped through the parting crowd of the gallery and fell into step beside him without saying a word. The hollow, metallic corridor echoed with the synchronized, rhythmic thud of their heavy flight boots against the deck plating. "You flew clean, Jace," Kael said quietly, desperately trying to break the suffocating tension between them. "You did it exactly by the book. No wasted speed, no mistakes. Books are for slaves, Kael," Jace said, stopping abruptly in the middle of the empty hallway. His jaw tightened into a bitter, sharp line, and for the first time the mask slipped. The final stage of that trial was a meat grinder. It was specifically designed by the High Lords to teach us commoners how to die with honor for the hierarchy. It was a test of submission. Staples didn't play their game. He tore the book to pieces and threw the ashes in their faces. "Does his victory bother you that much?" Kael asked directly, searching his friend's eyes. Jace looked Kael dead in the eye, a dark, violent storm brewing beneath his brow. "I don't care about his win, Kael. I care about the aftermath. I care about what this system will do to the rest of us, just to balance the scales and prove they are still in control. When a slave flies too high and proves he is better than his masters, the lords don't just punish the slave. They burn the entire settlement down to remind everyone else of their place." Jace's grim warning became an agonizing reality within 48 hours. The squadron's workload doubled overnight under the guise of increased readiness. In the freezing, unforgiving void of space, New Squadron was pushed through endless, grueling live-fire drills, weaving through spinning asteroid fields until their sensors fried. Pilots were running on pure fumes, their eyes bloodshot from sleep deprivation, while noble officers handed down severe, unjust punishments for the slightest microsecond of hesitation. But while the squadron bled on the flight line, the real horror was happening in the darkest bowels of the ship. The following day, while Kael was adjusting the primary thrusters on his starfighter, his hands covered in grease, TAMS, a nervous, twitchy deck tech in scratched. Poorly maintained void armor slipped into the maintenance bay, casting frantic glances over his shoulder. "They're breaking him, Kael," Tams whispered, his voice trembling so hard he could barely form the words. "Who?" Kael set his hydrospanner down, his gut instantly twisting. "Staples." Down in a secure, isolated cell beneath the officer's gym. Lady Cynthia Winfield has taken personal, absolute custody of him. A gym orderly told me they haven't allowed him to sleep or close his eyes for 12 hours straight. She's personally throwing him across the high-gravity mats, using heavy cybernetic training gear to push his body past total physical collapse. And when his heart starts to fail and he passes out, they don't give him medical aid. They shock his nervous system awake with neural prods to force him to do it again. Kael felt his blood run entirely cold, the air leaving his lungs. Are they insane? He's a lieutenant. He's the best pilot on this entire ship. He's not a pilot to them anymore, Kael. He's a dangerous virus in their system, Tams whispered, leaning in closer. Winfield claims she's forcing his body to integrate his unapproved, low-grade military cybernetics, but anyone with a brain can see what's happening. They are systematically dismantling the man's spirit. They want to see exactly how much a commoner can bleed before his pride breaks, and he learns to sit, stay, and beg like a dog. "Good," a heavy, harsh voice boomed from the shadows of the bay. Bren, an auxilia corporal with a jagged, ugly scar running down his neck, stepped into the dim light of the hangar. "About time someone put that stray dog back in the dirt where he belongs." He thought he was special because of a simulation. If he survives this, he'll be lucky if he has the spine left to look a noble in the eye, let alone sit in a cockpit. By the end of the second day, the usual military pretense of routine in the mess hall was entirely replaced by a suffocating fog of scuttlebutt and hushed, paranoid terror. The commoners ate in absolute silence, while the nobles spoke in sharp, fast bursts of nervous energy. I heard he lost his right eye. The cybernetic implants are rupturing his central nervous system. Winfield made him run live tactical drills completely blind and deaf. He's finished. He'll never sit in a cockpit again. They've ruined his hands. Kael stared down at the gray protein block on his tray, feeling a heavy wave of violent nausea wash over him. Across the table, Jace Rook sat in an absolute, terrifying silence that felt heavier than the vacuum of space. He hadn't touched his food. But when a group of highborn officers 2 tables over erupted into cruel, booming laughter over a joke about how easily a commoner's bones snap under high-gravity training. The steel fork in Jace's hand bent entirely out of shape, his knuckles turning white under the sheer force of his grip. He didn't say a word, he didn't make a scene, but Kael watched the metal twist and knew this silence wasn't peace. It was just the fuse burning down toward the powder keg. That night the barracks were cold. Kael lay flat in his bunk, staring up at the metallic, scratched underside of the top rack, his arms folded behind his head. A few days ago, Wyatt Staples was just a ghost story, a washed-up transport pilot hauling waste between dead-end sectors. Now he was a living, bleeding symbol of defiance that the entire ship was desperately trying to erase from existence. The sacred hierarchy had been cut deep, and the wound required a massive sacrifice of blood to heal. Kael slowly turned on his side, his voice barely a breath in the dim, red night lighting of the quarters. "Jace, do you think he even survives until the morning watch?" No answer came from the top bunk. The silence stretched out, long and heavy. But in the crushing, suffocating quiet of the barracks, Jace's sharp, uneven, and furious breathing spoke louder than any words ever could. Out in the freezing blackness of the void, the Exalted Virtue was floating on a massive ocean of hidden resentment, and Staples' victory had just dropped a burning match into the center of it. Nobody on this ship was going to escape the blast.